Hi, welcome to the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia, where there's a new exhibition called Flags and Founding Documents, 1776 to today. I'm Jeff Bridgman, owner of Jeff R. Bridgman American Antiques, and I'm the curator of the flag portion of this exhibition, which runs from June 12th to September 6th. So come on in and have a look. This is the Patriots Gallery on the museum's first floor, a huge exhibit space and necessary to mount an exhibit of this scale. This is actually a follow-up to our 2019 exhibit in the same room called A New Constellation. In that, there were 40 different 13-star flags with no less than 32 different star configurations represented, because many people don't know that from the beginning and throughout the 19th century until 1912, there was no official way to put the stars on the flag. There were no official shades of red and blue, no official proportions for the flag, no official number of points on the stars. The blue area or the canton didn't have to sit in a particular position within the striped field. So there were all sorts of things that you could do graphically with the flag in the 19th century that isn't true of today. And you'll get to see why some of these are so amazing. This exhibit takes us forward from 13 stars to the present 50 with some surprises thrown in there. So come on and take a walk through with me. So our flag was created on June 14th, 1777. That's what we now celebrate as Flag Day in America. And the original legislation said that there would be 13 stars in the form of a new constellation. But the constellation wasn't spelled out. And then there were to be 13 stripes alternating red and white. So this particular flag is one of the earliest of all 13-star flags that exists in America, and the earliest that I've ever owned personally. This was formerly part of the Masti collection. The Mastis were the first big collectors to produce a book on flags, on flag collecting, back in 1973, and this was prominently featured in it. This is what's known as the Great Star pattern, a star made out of stars, and really, really rare in 13-star examples. The only 19th or 18th century example that's known in this particular style. The 14th state, Vermont, entered the Union in 1791. This 14-star flag, however, was not made at the time when we had 14 states. The 14-star flag was never official. We actually skipped ahead to the 15-star flag. So 14 was left sort of in limbo. This particular one was actually made later, during the antebellum period, and it really shows a reversal rather than a growth. What it shows is the number of Union states at the time. So at this particular point in history, we had 29 states in total, and there were 15 slave states, 2 of which had just come in back to back, very controversial, Florida and Texas. So you'll see flags like this made from this point onward through the Civil War that actually show solidarity for the northern or Union states. And as you're about to see in the exhibit, this isn't the only flag like this that I brought. There are a number of really interesting examples that fall along these same exact lines. So Kentucky became the 15th state in 1792, 1 year after Vermont. But the 14th and the 15th stars weren't added to the flag until 1795. At that point, the stripe count was also increased. And it stayed in place until 1818, a huge expanse of time in early America in terms of the changing of the flag. Now, how many flags exist with 15 stars over that period? Almost none. That's why this is one of the most amazing things that exists in early American flags. Now, this flag has no stripes, right? This is called a jack. A jack was flown on a US Navy ship when it was at port or at anchor. And it was the same size as the canton, the blue area of the stars and stripes that was flown on the same ship. Among known 15-star examples, there is the Star-Spangled Banner at the Smithsonian, one of the most famous flags in all of America, probably the most famous flag. There's one in England, and there's a couple of more in the States. And so over that huge expanse of time, in the flag world anyway, there's about 6 things that survive that are period with 15 stars. So what a great thing to be able to share. Over here you can see a portrait of Thomas Brown, who owned this flag and was a Navyman, US Navyman. He fought in the Barbary Wars, where he served under Stephen Decatur, the most famous Navy captain at the time, and aboard the USS Philadelphia. The flag was found with his portrait. It was handed down through the family, and just a wonderful relic of American history. So Tennessee became the 16th state in 1796. And I elected not to bring a 16-star flag, but a flag with 16 stripes, because this tells a fun story too, and it's a wonderfully graphic thing. This is a flag of the Revenue Marine, or better known as the Revenue Cutter Service. The Revenue Cutter Service was formed in 1790 by Alexander Hamilton, then head of the U.S. Treasury, who was concerned about money coming into the federal government through tariffs. That was really the only means by which the government raised money at the time. There was no income tax. And in the period between the Revolutionary War and that time, there were no ships. We sold our US Navy ships to pay debts to France, and effectively the Navy dissolved. So Hamilton put the Revenue Marine in place to protect ships in ports and make sure that taxes were collected as necessary on import and export of goods. This particular flag has 16 stripes because it actually became official in 1799 by an act of Congress. And it remains so today. But now it's a little different, because in 1915, many years later, this became the U.S. Coast Guard. So it moved from the Department of the Interior to the War Department at that time, merging with the U.S. Lifeguard Service and other entities to become the Coast Guard. And today you'll recognize it if you ever see that flag. It has a big emblem, a device of the Coast Guard here in the stripes, but it's effectively the same otherwise. Wonderful eagle here with an arch of 13 stars, and probably that star count changed over time, but they're so rare that you almost never see them. Some of the surviving examples actually have 13 stripes, which is inaccurate, but people did what they wished at the time, and that variation is what makes 19th century flags so wonderful. So Ohio joined the Union as the 17th state in 1803. The 17-star flag never became official. we didn't officially change the flag from 1795 to 1818 until there were actually 5 more states that came in after the 15-star flag. So period 17-star flags do exist. They're extraordinarily rare. I actually owned one. One of the greatest flags that I ever owned. This particular banner was made about 100 years later, and it has 17 stars that surround the word Ohio, and then over a field of 13 red and white stripes, we have a version of the Ohio State seal. All of these 19th century and early 20th century flags are really interesting because, we think, people would follow all sorts of strict guidelines, but they just didn't. This is actually an 1860 version of the Ohio State seal. It's not even current to the time period when the flag was made, close to 1900. But information traveled slowly at that time, and if you wanted to make this banner and you wanted to find a copy of the seal, you couldn't just run down to your local library and necessarily get a current copy. How would you get it? There was no internet. You couldn't call and say, hey, send me a photo. You could if you had enough time, but all of this kind of stuff happened, which makes for all of sorts of great variation in early flags. So while Thomas Jefferson brought about the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, same year that Ohio became the 17th state, Louisiana didn't become its own state until 1812. So the 18-star flag, which was never official, basically wasn't produced. There's at least one known example, but this particular flag is an interesting one. So this is a parade flag printed on cotton. It happens to be the only one that exists in 18 stars. And it was made not probably to represent Louisiana, but more likely to remove the southern states from the flag. So this is yet another interesting northern abolitionist flag removing the slave states from the star count. Indiana joined the Union as the 19th state in 1816. The 19-star flag was never official, but it would have been theoretically produced for just 1 year. This particular flag wasn't made at that time, but later, either as an abolitionist flag to remove the southern states or to glorify the addition of Indiana later on in the mid-19th century. And look at this tremendous, beautiful medallion pattern with a big star in the center and just slightly smaller, but also big stars in the corners, and going out in what I call a starburst medallion. Just a beautiful flag, and it's no wonder that the museum chose this for much of the advertising, because it really is one of the most dynamic cantons that you'll see on early flags. Next up is this 20-star flag. So this painting of George Washington, hand-painted on silk, was sewn inside this ring of 20 stars. The flag was found by relatives of a friend of mine who sent it to him, who then called me and said, I have a 20-star flag that was just brought to me, and it's got a painting of George Washington in the middle of the canton, inside the 20 stars. It's got an eagle on the reverse. It's made of silk. The stars are gilt painted, as is the eagle. And he says, I think I have a period flag, a period 20-star flag. And I said, wow, you definitely could. Please send me images. So I got the photos and looked, and I saw a rosy-cheeked Washington, which tends to be, this is a Victorianized image like cherubs with the rosy cheeks, popular in the Victorian period, popular in the second half of the 19th century. And the eagle I knew to be Civil War period at the earliest. And I said to my friend, hey, what you really have here is a tremendous thing, maybe a Civil War battle flag, and with Washington's image just as a throwback to the Revolution, and with that exclusionary count of 20 stars. And we kind of went back and forth on that, and he took the flag to a museum at my bidding after I saw it in person, and thought just the same thing I had told him over the phone. And they looked at the flag all day in this new textile lab that the museum had, that he had a relationship with, and they didn't really find anything that would disprove it from being from the 18 teens. The last thing they did during the day, however, was to take a little camera on a scope and run it down between the two pieces of silk that made the canton, the two blue pieces of silk, because if you paint on this, it soaks through. So if you have a canton that's painted, you need to have it painted on two separate pieces sewn together. And they were separated at the top. And just for fun, they sent this camera down, not having any idea what they were going to find. And lo and behold, behind the painting of Washington, it said Green Mountain Boys. Unbelievable. Unbelievable find. Definitely a Civil War period battle flag representing soldiers from the state of Vermont who, under Ethan Allen during the Revolutionary War, earned the nickname Green Mountain Boys. Of course, Vermont didn't exactly exist at the time, but it was a region made up of parts of New York State and Massachusetts and New Hampshire that actually became Vermont. And Green Mountain Boys became a nickname for soldiers from Vermont. Well, it still exists that way today. Remarkable find, remarkable story, and just a terrific flag that I'm honored to share here with everyone. So Mississippi became the 20th state in 1818, and at that time, another Flag Act was passed. That officially updated the 15-star flag, which had been official since 1795, to include the 5 more states that had been added up to Mississippi. And at that time, the number of stripes was reduced from 15 to 13, where it remains today. That was a one-year flag, as was this one. Illinois joined the Union just 1 year later, and this was a one-year flag, official for just that tiny bit of time. This is a period example, made of silk, with silk embroidered stars in 2 different sizes, and what I call a snowflake medallion, and around the edge is a wonderful bullion fringe. This was made in Paris, generally speaking, and imported into the States at the time. They were the biggest producers of it. Has a wonderful red cord down this side where a staff would be placed, and this was probably a militia unit flag. Hardly anything from this period exists, and it's just a tremendous, tremendous example that I sold some years ago. I've sold a couple of times, in fact. Alabama joined the Union as the 22nd state in December of 1819. And it was followed almost immediately thereafter in 1820 by the state of Maine. So 22 was never an official star count, and the flag would officially change on the 4th of July. So after the Flag Act of 1818, stars were officially added on the 4th of July for any states that came in during the preceding flag year, if you will. Now, this particular 22-star flag is another abolitionist Civil War example, removing the southern states. Throughout the antebellum and even during the war, states continued to be added to both sides. That meant that an abolitionist flag or an exclusionary flag, and some were made in the South too, excluding the northern states. You're going to see one of those in our exhibit. But this is another one that removes the slave states from the star count. This is what's called a medallion pattern. And in flags, while you could do whatever you wished, stars were typically arranged in rows. This one is arranged in a circular design with a star in the middle and a wreath around it and a second wreath, so a double wreath with a star in each corner of the canton. So, while Maine became the 23rd state in 1820, 23-star flags don't exist. There are no known period examples as far as I'm aware. However, there are some that were made with that star count to remove the southern states. This is the best of all anti-slavery flags I've ever seen. There are some really wonderful ones out there, but I've never seen anything that's more profound, if you will, than this. With a wonderful eagle in the center in black and gold, and draped about it 23 black stars on a white field, and stripes alternating black and white throughout. Very clear, no union with slavery, very clear abolitionist message, and made during the Civil War, removing the slave states from the star count. So the addition of Maine in 1820 was followed just 1 year after by the addition of Missouri as the 24th state. That flag became official in 1822 and remained so until 1836, a huge expanse of time in terms of flags at any rate. Now, this is a period 24-star example from that time frame. And interestingly enough, almost none of these exists. It's one of the few that I've ever had in my hands. And you would think over that expanse there would be a fair number. Just not the case for whatever reason. This particular flag has a beautiful blue wool canton. And if you take a good look at the stars, you can see that they're single appliqued. That means that the stars were applied to one side, and then a cutout was made on the reverse so that the star could be seen on both sides. Usually when that occurs, the fabric is tucked under very tightly so to make the star as big as possible on the reverse. Here, the cutout is very tiny, and where what looks like sort of normal stars on the other side are far tinier on this side. Wonderful, wonderful graphic example. Very interesting. Certainly looks its part as a federal period American flag surviving into the 21st century. Over here we have our 25-star example in the middle of the big wall. This too is a flag that signifies the removal of the slave states. The 25th state was Arkansas, came in 1836 and was official for 1 year, but this was of course made afterwards. One of the interesting things about this flag is that the canton, which is faded almost to a green-gray, rests on a red stripe. When that is present, flag aficionados, some of us anyway, call that the blood stripe or the war stripe. And it's been suggested that the flag was produced that way when the nation was at war. We know that at some points sometimes that this occurs, it's just an error because there was no prescribed way to put the canton on the flag. It could be up on this stripe or this one, but typically it's on a white stripe. So this is a really interesting feature and not present, I don't think, on any of the examples we've looked at so far. Another really cool feature is this star in the center of the flag in the form of, well, what we now recognize as the Star of David. In the 19th century, this wasn't so much a symbol of the Jewish faith like it is today. Known as the Shield of David, it was a symbol within the Jewish symbolism, but it didn't really become popularized as the Star of David until the 20th century, when it became much more prominent. Now here, during the Civil War era, it probably reflects maybe the 8th Corps. That was a Civil War military division. 2 or 3 corps would make an army, so it was a very large division. It would have been used probably at the headquarters. Maybe that's what they're trying to convey. Corps badges varied. I mean, there were clubs, there were or trifoils, as they're more properly called. There were all sorts of different shapes of badges, Maltese cross, 5-pointed star. The only other one that was a star other than 5-pointed was a 6-pointed star, and that's why this may be what the message is here on this particular flag. Michigan joined the Union as the 26th state in 1837. This flag, with its 26 stars, was made for a specific purpose, for the campaign of Henry Clay for the presidency as a Whig in 1844. In the 19th century, it was perfectly acceptable to use the flag as a medium of advertising. And the first to do this were the Whig Party in 1840, producing flags for the campaign of William Henry Harrison. Harrison was elected and served for about 30 days before he died of pneumonia after giving a long-winded inaugural speech without a top coat. But this is the second campaign for which they were used, and the Whigs found them very effective in conveying a message. So before this time, really, it was considered unbecoming of a gentleman to campaign for the White House. So this is some of the first campaign advertising. If you look here, you can see that Clay's portrait, executed in copper plate and set within this very interesting gear cog medallion, has a 1 wreath of stars and a star in each corner. And then in the same wonderful blue of the canton, Clay and Frelinghuysen, is printed here within the striped field. Canton rests on a red stripe, as I said, very unusual feature, and this is one of the most graphic flags that I think exists, especially in printed flags of the 19th century. Above it, we have a 27-star flag. This is a significant one, reflecting the addition of Florida in 1845, a slave state, and this was an official flag for just 1 year. Because of that, hardly any examples exist. But this would have taken us into the opening of the Mexican War and was probably a Mexican War flag used as a guide on or maybe a camp colors. Interestingly enough, this is the first time that U.S. infantry is authorized to carry the flag during wartime. Artillery was first authorized to carry the Stars and Stripes in 1834, followed by infantry in 1841, and cavalry not until the second year of the Civil War in 1862. So this represents very early use of the flag, probably by a military unit. And look at the stars, how there's one big star in the center, and then a perimeter of stars around it, and then the others are just clustered. Looks like they're trying to make a circular medallion, but it doesn't really happen. Big stars in each corner, largest in the center, and just a wonderful example of the period. Both Florida, the 27th state, and Texas, the 28th state, were brought in by newly elected President James Polk, an expansionist. And they came both in the year 1845, but Florida early in the year and Texas later in the year. So the 27 star flag was official for 1 year, and then it was followed by the 28 star flag, also official just for 1 year only. And for that reason, these are two of the most rare star counts that exist in 19th century flags. This is another Mexican War era flag, and I bet you've already guessed the other feature on this that makes it so unusual, which is the presence of red, white, and blue stripes. That is something that you see during the 18th century in illustrations, and in many other illustrations, and especially in this period in the 1830s and 40s, but on actual surviving flags, almost non-existent. The stars on this example are painted, which is unusual, but sometimes you see that. Certainly not present in 1 in 100 flags, but a very unusual feature in and of itself. And nobody, I don't think, is more patriotic than Texans. Sorry, the rest of America. This is a very proud state. Just as rare as the 27 and the 28 star flags is the 29 star flag. This is the only pieced and sewn example that I've ever owned, and one of just, I think, 3 known to survive that are actually period to the 1846 to 48 era. The 29th state was Iowa, came in 1846, and look at this tremendous star design, found on Cape Cod, and probably a ship's flag, almost certainly. Look at the huge star in the center, much bigger than my hand, and a star in each corner within this square of stars that creates sort of a fence around the perimeter. One of the best star designs and most unusual that you'll ever see in early flags. I was just thrilled to be able to acquire this. Wisconsin joined the Union as the 30th state in 1848. And the 30 star flag was used for a period of just 2 years, until 1850. This particular example, printed on cotton, is a parade flag. Parade flags were printed on cotton or silk, or sometimes on wool, sometimes even on paper later on. and tacked to a stick and made to wave at parades or political events. Most of the use of parade flags at this time was probably for political campaigning. The stars on this one are arranged in a double wreath, two circles of stars, big star in the center, which has a little halo around it. So I call this a haloed center star, and a star in each corner. One of the great early American explorers, John Fremont, opened California to statehood in 1850. He marched in and, looking for Pico, the Mexican general, didn't find him because he wasn't there at the time, but he ended up marching in to both San Francisco and Los Angeles and took each city with just 100 men. He went on to appoint himself military governor, only to be pardoned by President Polk, who kind of needed guys like that. And he opened California to the gold rush. He became wealthy himself, Fremont did, and ran for the presidency in 1856 on the newly formed Republican Party, supporting the anti-slavery ticket. Now, this particular 31-star flag has its stars arranged in what's known as the Great Star pattern, a star made out of stars, which is one of the most coveted geometric designs. This particular variant has a star between each arm. The flag itself was actually used later, with its name California painted over it. This is one of a series of known flags said to have been used at something called the Wigwam Convention. That was the 1860 Republican National Convention in Chicago, where Abraham Lincoln was selected as the nominee. Presidential conventions were called wigwams, or that is, the building where they were held was called a wigwam by nickname, but this particular building took that name onto itself. And just a great thing to have a 31-star flag that actually has the word California painted on it, because this denoted where delegates from that particular state were to sit at that particular convention. Great convergence of two wonderful California-related things on one flag. This is a 32-star parade flag with an eagle in the center. It is the only known printed flag with 32 stars. 30 of those appear in the ring around the eagle, which has these very folky, almost elongated stars, and star in each corner. And then the last two appear here under the eagle as tiny little stars. So maybe those were territories at the time that this was made, which would put that back into the 1840s instead of in 1858, when Minnesota joined the Union as the 32nd state. That flag was used for just 1 year, and that reflects why it's so rare. Now, flags that have an eagle in the canton are very, very unusual and coveted among collectors. So it's really great thing to see here. Hardly any printed flags have eagles in the imagery in the canton like this one does. Oregon entered the Union as the 33rd state in 1859. This particular flag is a tremendous one. It probably belonged to a militia unit. Made of silk, its stripes are actually made of ribbon that have been joined together, and this allowed for the flag to be constructed rather quickly because you didn't have to make flat fell seams. Also, however, flags that have ribbon as stripes are often beautiful, and they usually have a little decorative edge along the ribbon itself, which sort of elevated the flag, and certainly does in this case, where the stripes are almost pink. Probably this is a lady's dress fabric, really. It's probably intended for ladies' dresses as opposed to for flag production. And that makes it even more interesting, I think. In the canton here, we have 33 gilt-painted stars in no less than 3 different sizes. I believe this to have been a stencil for a 26-star flag, to which some tiny stars were added where they could be fit. They're not super tiny, but they're smaller than the rest around them, to bring that count up to 33. Wonderful big star in the center, and stars arranged in what's known as the Great Star pattern. By the way, that came about, we think, in the 1820s, when Governor of New York State, Peter Wendover, and a U.S. naval hero, Captain Samuel Reed, and who invented many things, got together to try to design a star configuration that would become official on the American flag, to give it an official pattern in the 18-teens for the first time. Of course, it never happened, but they did propose this, and you can see how if the stars were kept in this sort of an arrangement, that there would be a consistency in the appearance of the flag from a distance. So if you added a 34th star, it wouldn't look much different than it does right here. Great star patterns were produced by anybody willing to make them, one of the most coveted patterns in flag collecting, but never did become the official design for the star configuration of the American flag. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, the 33-star flag was official, and there was a 33-star flag flying at Fort Sumter when it was fired upon by Confederates in South Carolina. The flag flying there had a very unusual diamond pattern, shared by almost no flags throughout time. Diamond configurations like this one that appears here are so highly unusual that there's only about 10 of them among sewn examples. This one is different than the flag that was flying at Fort Sumter. They're all different, all individually made. Don't know 2 that are the same. The canton here rests on a red stripe, so it rests on the war stripe, or the blood stripe it's sometimes called, that thought to have been a wartime feature, but rare in any event. What's very cool about this entirely hand-sewn flag is that along the bottom here, at some point, probably post-war, for parade use or for hanging in a military veterans hall or something of that sort, is a banner with a stencil that reads, "We love every stripe and star." Slogans like this on an antique American flag are few and far between. Facing our 34-star flag representing the Union in the opening of the war, this is what represented the South. So this is a very interesting flag because of its star count, and it's one that's not widely recognized. This is the Stars and Bars. Yes, that's a term often misused and applied to the Confederate battle flag, but actually it was a nickname for this flag, which had a number of stars equal to the number of Confederate states at the time, and 3 bars. That nickname given to the flag by soldiers that carried it as sort of a play on the Stars and Stripes. In this case, there are 12 stars, which is an unusual number. 7 Confederate states seceded together early in 1861, followed individually by 8, 9, 10, and 11. Then 2 more states, which didn't so officially secede, were brought in by Confederate President Jefferson Davis later in that year, late in 1861 in November and December. The 12th of those was Missouri. So Missouri is reflected here in the star count, very unusual count for stars and bars. And one of the reasons that this isn't remembered well is because, well, it was the official national flag of the Confederacy for 2 years, but on the battlefield, it wasn't so good. The reason for that is that it looked way too much like the Stars and Stripes, and there was a reason for flags on the battlefield. These were filled with black powder smoke up to a rather high level, and if you wanted to see your guys, you needed to be able to see that flag and instantly identify it as the American flag or a Confederate flag, for example. So in late 1861, the Confederate battle flag was proposed as a design, and generally, while it didn't become an official flag of the Confederacy, it went to use right away because it was a much better signal. It didn't look anything like the Stars and Stripes, and thus served its function. This is maybe the most infamous stars and bars that I know of in the flag world. That's because it was owned by collectors Boleslaw and Marie d'Ortrange Mastai, the first big collectors of antique flags, who did a book published in 1973 called The Stars and the Stripes. The canton of this flag appears on the cover of the book along with 5 others, and then it's prominently featured within it, and it's memorable for a number of reasons, but the most prominent of those is this slogan in the canton, "God armeth the patriot." If that doesn't give you chills, I don't know what will. The 35th state, West Virginia, broke off from Virginia, slave state and southern state, during the Civil War to become a free state. This occurred just before the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863. This particular 35-star flag is press-dyed or clamp-dyed on wool. This was a new method of flag production, or relatively new, which came about in the 1840s and wasn't widely pursued in the 1840s or 50s. And you start to really see it during the Civil War in a slightly more large numbers, but this is a really rare one. The stars here are random. There's really no pattern to them, and that's really unusual in early flags. Usually there's rows or there's a circular pattern, or much more rare is the star-shaped great star pattern, and then there are other patterns more rare than that. Well, random patterns fall right in the mix of that. Only, I think there's maybe 3 of these. There's 2 or 3 that survive. I've owned this one twice. There's actually a 36-star example that exists also, a couple of those, with a star right here added to the same clamp-dyed pattern. The 36th state, Nevada, was brought in by Abraham Lincoln in 1864, just 8 days before the presidential election. It was a silver state. The Union needed money for the war, and it represented 2 more Republican votes on the anti-slavery ticket. So here we have 36 stars with a little wreath of 5 and 1 in the center, then a bigger wreath around it, and 3 stars in each corner. Just a spectacular medallion pattern, very unusual. And as you can see with this wonderful and entirely hand-sewn merino wool flag, wonderful wool, unusual type of wool to see in flag making. Up top, we have a commission pennant that matches. So these would have been used on a ship. and probably a private ship, not a Navy ship, and maybe one owned by somebody with some wealth. A commission pennant, by tradition, was flown on a U.S. Navy ship at the topmast, and it was a long, skinny pennant, and the first thing that you would see coming over the horizon on a warship. Private individuals and yacht clubs and all sorts of other seafaring people copied what the Navy did in their use of signals. So that's really what's occurring here. A commission pennant typically was very long, and in the 18th and 19th century could easily be 100 feet long. So this is a tiny one. It also was the format of something called a homeward bound pennant, which was flown on a ship that had been at sea for a long period of time when it came home. And it had a number of stars that reflected the length of the boat, the number of officers aboard, how many months it had been at sea, etc. This is an odd star count with just 6 stars, and more indicative of a homeward bound pennant than a commission pennant, which little ones typically had either 13 stars or 7 stars later on. You can see that during the Civil War period, but not often. Or they had the whole complement of stars. In any event, this is a highly unusual and very graphic pair, and you almost never find a commissioning pennant with the flag it was flown with, nor that you can actually fit in one frame. Here we've displayed the commission pennant in a waving format, back and forth, 3-dimensional, and given the whole thing a shadow box to accommodate that mount. And I just think it's just a beautiful thing. I'm just thrilled to have been able to acquire. Nebraska was brought into the Union as the 37th state during the period of Reconstruction. It came in 1867 during Grant's presidency, and was sort of replaced in 1876 when Colorado joined the Union. Now, in the center here, we have one big star and 2 wreaths of stars, and then groups of 4 stars in each corner. But that isn't the most interesting thing about this flag. As you can probably tell, all the stars are 6-pointed. Now, you could do anything you wanted to. It wasn't prescribed to make a 5-pointed star on the American flag. There was no legislation regarding that until 1912. And so you could do whatever you wished, but you almost never saw this. In the corner, big star in each corner, bigger star in the middle, just a tremendous pattern. This was still official in 1876 at the time of the Centennial celebration, and that's probably the reason for the making of this particular flag. But it actually remained official for 1 more year because Colorado came in August of 1876. And so the official flag year didn't end until July 4th of the following year, when the 37th star was officially added. One of the clearest messages on the American flag is present here on this Centennial example made for the 100th anniversary of American independence. Up top, there are 38 stars that form the dates 1776. And below, there are 42 stars that form 1876. Was that foretelling of 4 more states soon to join the Union? It might have been, or it may just be that it took 4 more stars to make an 8 than it did a 7. But the 38 stars above are purposeful. Colorado joined the Union that year as the 38th state, but interestingly enough, 38 star flag didn't really become official till the following year. This is one of only 4 known designs where the stars actually spell something. And it has an even more interesting feature in that these stars are sort of 10-pointed. That is, they're 5-pointed stars, but they have rays extending from the center, sort of like the Star of Bethlehem. And whatever the purpose, they're fanciful, they're beautiful, and very fitting for this Centennial flag. The Centennial celebration, the nation's official Centennial celebration, was held right here in Philadelphia in Fairmount Park, where 225 buildings were built, most of them temporary, bolted together, and torn down and sold after the World's Fair that they were constructed for. That went on for a period of about 6 months, and they needed flags that were decorative and would last for a period of time. So this is a printed flag, but it's printed on a combination of wool and cotton. Wool sheds water, but it's hard to print on, and putting them both together allowed them to print a flag that would sustain itself against the weather over a period of time, and yet be, relatively large in scale and decorative for the Centennial Exposition. In the corner here, we have 2 interesting parade flags with 39 stars. In the late 19th century, it became common to add stars to the flag before the state was even in. That's sort of reflected in the 38-star flags that you see during the year of the Centennial in 1876. But at least that state actually came in that year, and nobody cared what was official. As soon as the state was coming, people added the star. As soon as they knew it was in, they absolutely added the star. But something else they did that was interesting was add them before they were even in at all. And that was the case here in these 2 examples. The one up top has stars in 2 different sizes, but in columns of equal height to create this odd 39-star count. The one below, another type and a different design that's sort of, it's a triple wreath, and it sort of looks like a traditional medallion, but there are 2 stars in the middle instead of 1. So there's a little wreath here, another around it, 2 in the center, which makes for a really odd-looking pattern, and 1 in each corner. Both of these flags we know to have been made in 1876 for the Centennial itself, because we see them sewn into Centennial quilts of that period. So they can be effectively dated to that time. They reflect the hopeful addition of the Dakota Territory as one state. Now, while Colorado came in as 38, 39 didn't come until 13 years later in 1889, when the Dakotas came as, well, as we all know today, as 2 separate states. They both came on the same day, so 39 was never accurate except for part of a day, nor was it ever official. One of the interesting things here is that there's a label here on what would have been an entire bolt of printed flags with 39 stars. They're using Washington's name and image to sell flags here, and just a beautiful label from a flag company called S.H. Green and Sons in Rhode Island. So there are various star counts at the tail end of the 19th century that are really unusual because they were accurate for only a couple of days and never official. This is one of them. This is a 40-star parade flag with with wonderful folky stars that point in all directions. When I first got involved in antique flags, 40-star parade flags were not known to exist. Now there are a number of them. This is the primary known style, although there are actually a couple of others. One, I believe, with a circular pattern and one in a larger scale. Now, it was perfectly acceptable to advertise on the flag, and we know that started in presidential elections in 1840, and you also see it for store advertising. But something else that was popular on flags in the 19th century was to put the name of a Civil War veterans post on the flag, and that continued into the 20th century, and that's what's present here. For the Everett Peabody Post of Georgetown, Massachusetts, the GAR was the Grand Army of the Republic, was the Veterans Association for the Union Army, the primary one, although others existed. And this post number 108, and that's all overprinted in black ink here in the striped field. So on November 2nd of 1889, the Dakotas came in as two separate states. At this time, some 39 star flags were being produced, thinking they're coming in as one state, as the Dakota Territory entering as one state, but they came as two on that particular day. So two of the most rare flags of the late 19th century are over here in the corner. Both rare for different reasons, but really interesting ones. So in 1876, we had 38 states after the addition of Colorado, and we didn't get any more states for a period of 13 years. In 1889, they started to make some 39-star flags in anticipation of the addition of the Dakota Territory, which came in as two states on November 2nd. And then a couple of days later, on November 8th, we got Montana as the 41st state. That was accurate for just 3 days, never official, of course. And then we got another state, Washington. So 3-day flag, and up in the corner here, there's a little embroidered star, and inside it, the initials of it, it's a backwards S or a Z, W Company, 1889. Great to see a date on such a rare flag. I only know of 3 examples of this to exist in sewn flags, 2 of which I've had the great privilege to own, including this one, and there's one other in a museum that I'm aware of. So most collectors have gone their lifetime without ever owning an example in this star count. And look at the wonderful design where little crosshatches are created by adding a star between the stars in the rows. So you have the 41-star flag, and then 42 Washington State came in 1889, also on the 11th of November. And then 42-star flags were produced for the next 7 or 8 months. And then one day before the 42 would become official, Idaho snuck in as the 43rd state. And while this became the official flag for 1 year, in whatever pattern you wanted to make it in, it wasn't produced. Why? Because Wyoming was coming and everybody knew it. So flag makers just ignored the official star count, that's pretty much what they typically did all the time anyway, going for what was practical, which was the production of 44-star flags. So this is one of the very rare 43-star flags that I know to survive, only slightly less rare than the 41-star flag, official but never made. So there's a big star in each corner and one in the center, a wreath here, groups of 3 stars here, 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 and here in different formats, and sort of what you might call cookie corners on a piece of furniture that sort of fence in the big stars in the corners. What a fantastic design, an 11 on a scale of 1 to 10, and just a rare, rare thing. So we've sort of forgotten the 42-star flag and all of that. And that's here. So 42-star flags, unlike the other 2 star counts, were very common. They were produced in great numbers because we didn't get any states for a period of 13 years, and then all of a sudden we had 4 new ones. And everybody thought, I think, that this was going to become the official star count. Well, among 42-star flags, this is a rare one. The stars are arranged in something I call a beehive, for lack of any better knowing what exactly this is. There are smaller stars here in this grouping, and 2 little ones in the corner, 2 little ones in the corner, 4 bigger ones across the top. This same design, or very close to it, is known without the 4 big stars as a 38-star flag. But I think this is maybe what was represented here was a beehive, because in early America, the beehive was representative of hard work and industry, and integral to American, and certainly the American West. People don't even have a clue about how hard it would have been to survive in the West at that time, and the cushy lifestyles that we all, including myself, live in today. So maybe these are supposed to be bees in the corner here around the hive. Hard to say, but a really cool pattern nonetheless, and an interesting unofficial star count used from 1889 to 1890, and reflecting the addition of Washington State. So the 44th state, Wyoming, came in 1890, and the 44-star flag became official in 1891. This is one of the most spectacular star patterns in early flags that I know of, and one of only 4 designs where they actually spell something. There's 1776, 1876, which are really dates or numeric rather than letters, and then there are 3 styles with letters. This is one of them, US, and there's only 2 other known copies of this particular flag, so it's a super rare one. The other known patterns are USA, which exists in 48 stars, and Free, which is a Civil War period design with an obvious message, known in both 35 stars and 36. Utah joined the Union as the 45th state in 1896. It had been trying to get in since Civil War time, but because of polygamy, kept getting rejected. The head of the Mormon Church came out and denounced that, and then Utah was let in. Now, these 2 45-star flags, made in the year 1900, are interesting not so much because of the star count. 45-star flags are common, but in this case, the rare feature is the more obvious one here, where portraits of McKinley and Roosevelt and Bryan and Stevenson appear on the flags because these guys were running against one another for the presidency and vice presidency of the United States. This is the only type of portrait flag that in a Stars and Stripes that features Teddy Roosevelt, and likewise here in a portrait flag that features Bryan and Stevenson. Portrait flags coveted by collectors, even though I think word flags are really just as good. Some of them are even better. These are interesting because they're a really good illustration of the change in public opinion about the flag at the time. So the flag ethics that we have today didn't really come about until the latter 1880s, when you start to see little pamphlets and booklets released by veterans groups, insurance groups, stating things about the flag and the reverence with which we think we should maybe be treating it. So campaign flags were already becoming unpopular, and there were several attempts in various states to outlaw advertising on the flag of any sort and to make all sorts of rules for the use of the flag. Nothing really passed right away, but it's obvious here where public opinion was going in moving the portraits off of the image of the Stars and Stripes itself. The 46th state, Oklahoma, was brought to statehood by Teddy Roosevelt during his presidency. It was entered into the Union in 1907. It was Indian territory before that time. And Teddy Roosevelt had a lot of friends living there, former Rough Riders. He loved the West. He loved that particular state. And so he was integral in that affair. This particular flag is a camp colors. It's a military camp colors, and really, really, really rare because of it. It's the only one I've ever seen in 46 stars, and I don't know any to exist in 45 or 44 or 43 or 42. And keeps right going down to the Civil War. They really, you never see them. This is interesting because it looks just like Civil War camp colors I've owned that were made by the Horstman Company here in Philadelphia. In fact, this is definitely a Horstman-made flag, and it's signed right below the canton in the white stripe along the hoist where it wraps around the hoist. Printed on wool. That was a trait of flags made by Horstman, and they've been producing them from the Civil War period right on through. And this is its original staff. So the reason that this is such a funky looking thing is it has this very long, 8, almost 9 foot staff with a brass point on the end, and you could stick this right in the ground. It would mark a military encampment, and it was used within the camp for military drilling. The 47 star flag is another one of those rare things because of how long it was accurate. So the 47th and 48th states, New Mexico and Arizona, came in within a 1.5 month period in 1912. And the 48 star flag became official that year. So this is a 1.5 month long flag. It's a 47 star flag, and it's a parade flag printed on silk. It is the only known example in this style. This little guy has a row of 7 right here, and the rest are rows of 8. Unless you stop to look, you'd never see it. Even I might look right by it. Now, I know what the design looks like, and my eye is sort of trained to that, but even so, this is an easy one to miss. So look out every time you're looking at 48 star flags and you think you've got a common one. Sometimes you might not. This is New Mexico statehood, early part of 1912. So Arizona joined the Union as the 48th state in 1912, followed just after New Mexico, both states coming in the same year. And there was a man named Wayne Whipple from Boston who moved to Philadelphia, who wrote a book on the American flag in 1904. And Whipple decided that he wanted to be the guy who designed the first official star pattern for the American flag, with the addition of the 47th and 48th states. In fact, I think at the time that he started to design that, the 46th wasn't in yet. So he was lobbying for an official design at a time when some reverence was being paid to the American flag ethics, and okay, it's time we get our stuff together and come up with an official star pattern. So many people don't know that there never was any sort of competition for that, either in this year or with the 50-star flag or the 49-star flag. It's a myth that there was any sort of competition to come up with that. That being said, that didn't stop people from lobbying to be the guy to do it. And that's what Whipple did here. This particular flag is one of only two I know to exist in the Whipple design that are pieced and sewn together. Whipple made his own flags. He commissioned them, most of them printed, all the rest of them printed, that he took to rallies and such. He befriended Taft, he befriended Teddy Roosevelt, and he generally had their support for the star pattern. They seemed to have liked the guy, and they probably liked the design. But when it came to actually picking it, President Taft, who was in office in 1912, kept handing off anything he got to the War Department. And while the design selection was up to an executive order of the president, he deferred to the War Department that had its own design team that designed the 48-star flag with 6 rows of 8 stars, and the 49-star flag and the 50. Now, this design that Whipple came up with is sort of an ingenious one. In the center is a 6-pointed great star of 13 stars for the original 13 colonies, followed by 25 around it to represent those that came in the first 100 years of America. Those around it, beyond it, are those that came in after 1876. And if you added another one, you just add it to the outer ring and move them around in a ring around the rosy musical chairs kind of function, and voila, you pretty much have the same exact thing. A beautiful design, way more beautiful than was selected, and I think much more ingenious, but nonetheless, it wasn't to be. But boy, is it a great graphical representation of early flags, and a wonderful thing. This particular flag, in fact, was handed down through the Whipple family. I acquired it with Whipple's original mock-ups with little foil stars that he used to make the pattern, and actually none of them matches this one exactly, and with 50 letters from his daughter and his family, and this came with the actual letter. He sent this exact flag to Taft in the White House. Taft sent it on to the War Department, and the War Department sent it back to Whipple. And I had the 2 original letters that came with that. This particular flag was lent here to the museum by Morris Offutt, who owns it, and I sold it to Morris many years ago. Morris is now the chairman of the museum, and he very generously lent it here and is very proud of it. The 49th state was Alaska. It entered the Union in 1859, followed by Hawaii actually later that year, but Hawaii came after July 4th and Alaska before. So this became the official flag for 1 year. 49-star flags are not in any way, shape, or form rare, though they are something that most people will go a lifetime without seeing. So this was an official star pattern with 7 stars staggered back and forth across the canton. while my interest in flags generally is focused on the 19th century and to the degree to which things exist, the 18th century, in the 20th century, probably my favorite material dates to the 1960s and 70s. Born in 1967, my earliest remembrance of patriotic things was the bicentennial in 1976, where I attended the little fair in my hometown, and the patriotism of that has stuck with me ever since. I might not have been part of the peace movement at the time, but I am really enamored with things related to it. And anything showing the peace symbol like this, which is really, really interesting. Now, there were 50 stars on this flag in the traditional and official pattern, and they were removed by somebody who was certainly attending some sort of event like Woodstock or a anti-war demonstration and trying to make the international symbol of peace. But they didn't quite have enough room to do it, so they ended up with, instead of a circle, they ended up with this, what really looks like a mushroom cap, which is just too funny, I think, and very indicative of the period in many ways, right? So now, flags that have a peace symbol, a solid peace symbol in them, you will see those produced at the time, but somebody took the stars off of a regular flag and made this one. And I only know of 2 other examples where this occurs. I owned one of them, and my ex-business partner sold the other one 20 years ago. No, more than that, 30 years ago, I would say. And scraped it off the wall of a barn in Woodstock, New York, or very near Woodstock. So it probably was a Woodstock flag and had been glued to the interior of a barn. The other one I had was nylon and definitely 70s and very, very cool. So you would think that more of these exist, but surviving examples, almost non-existent. In some ways, this is my favorite flag in the room. It's so cool and so unusual, and there's so little in this period which is interesting that it is really a standout. And along the same vein is this bicentennial flag. And this has another interesting hippie-era feature. Although it was designed by a flag aficionado from Massachusetts, when I bought this one, it was the only example I had ever known of or seen or anything of the sort. I now own another, but here the stars are arranged in a great star pattern, star made out of stars with a star between each arm, real 19th century pattern. And then there's 13 stars around it. Well, the 13 relate to the original 13 colonies, drawing a parallel between 1776 and 1976. But the little stars in the middle, there aren't 50 of them, as one might expect. Instead, there are 56. So it's an anticipatory flag with aspirations that the 5 U.S. territories plus Washington, D.C. would become states. So the final 2 flags to show you in the exhibit are these 2, which would probably predate the 56 star flag. This one here was made for an organization in Puerto Rico with 51 stars advocating for Puerto Rico statehood. The one next to it has 52 stars. This is actually a jacket decal, but very unusual because it shows individual stars and because of the 52-star count, advocating for 2 of the 5 U.S. territories to become states. Those are Guam, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, American Samoa, and the Mariana Islands. Pick your 2. Not sure which ones, but you will see things like this in the 1960s. There are 53-star flags, 54-star flags, all very rare. This is the only example of a 51 that I have ever owned. So thank you for joining me today for a walk through flags and founding documents at the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia, located on Chestnut Street, just a block and a half from Independence Hall and Independence Park, of course, in the Liberty Bell. It was a great honor to be able to present this exhibition, made possible by the museum's terrific staff, who are an absolute joy to work with at every point along the way. I'd like to thank Scott Stevenson, President and CEO, who was at the forefront of making this happen. I'd like to thank my good friends Morris Offit, Mark Schenkman, and the rest of the museum's board of directors. And special thanks to Matthew Skick, the museum's chief curator for this exhibit, who was terrific. As you can see throughout the Patriots Gallery, the exhibition also included original copies of American constitutions, including not only state constitutions, but one from the Confederate States of America during the Civil War, one from the Choctaw Indian Nation, and the grand prize, if you will, an original copy of the United States Constitution, one of only 11 known and the last in private hands, which subsequently, after this was over, sold at Sotheby's for just over $43 million, smashing all former records for any book, manuscript, or printed text that has ever crossed the auction block, not only in America but worldwide. I'd like to thank Alex McKechnie, the museum's PR guru, and Catherine Babs Miller, the exhibition manager, who coordinated everything and all the planning and design and etc., and kept it all on track. And all of the museum staff who participated in designing, lighting, labels, and doing all the other necessary tasks. I'd like to thank my good friends Calvin Ambrose and Rodney Gast and friends, my first-class delivery and installation crew, who installed the flags at the museum with what seems to be an ever-diminishing amount of help from me, and of course my own staff, Amanda, Sheila, Heidi, Billy, and Jimmy, who put up with me through all the planning and execution, who worked diligently with me to prepare everything. Tons of mounting and framing went into this, and thanks for all of that. And I'd like to thank my good friends and clients that generously lent flags where I had a void I simply couldn't fill. Last but not least, thank you to everyone who paid some of their hard-earned money to come view the exhibition in support of the museum's mission. I hope to return soon with another collection that I can share with America.